Hello, I'm Philip Stoughton for ScoopTalk. I'm here at Apex 2017 in San Diego. And what I want to discuss on this panel is the idea of Made in America. Is there some kind of political shift? Thanks very much for joining me. We have Pam from Tech Forecasters, we have Akhil from Omnics, and we have Everett. Thanks for being on the panel today. What I wanted to explore was not the idea of jobs or manufacturing coming back here for sentimental reasons, but why they should come back here for competitive reasons, making America competitive again, not great again, or any other political issue. Pam, maybe I can start with you. You've been working in the supply chain and operations side of this industry for a little while now,
Yes.
and seen lots of changes. What are you seeing right now?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that there's token bringing manufacturing back to the U.S., which is different from a mass of change. And as long back 30 years is from the start of when manufacturing left the U.S. shores, there's been talk about it coming back. But all the way along the way, it has been more on the token side. And tends to be very highly automated, so there are not as many jobs and so at this point, with Han Hai's CEO saying I'm going to build a factory here in the States, I think until things are more certain politically in this country, I think we're going to see some token moves, and it's yet to be seen if there's going to be a massive wave back.
And interestingly, Terry Gow in another speech said he is totally committed to China as well. So, there's always conflicting information. Akhil, you look at this from a supply chain consulting point of view, but also from a data-driven point of view. What are you seeing that is happening in terms of that movement, but also in how data and other things can make America a more competitive environment?
So I think, Phil, what we saw was the manufacturing, the outsourcing wave that really took place last decade, entire last decade, I would say. There was a focus on cost aspect of it, a lot focus on cost. But I think where companies and where the technology and the advances that have been in technology, product life cycle being shorter, I think companies are realizing that a longer supply chain is a lot more riskier, and it's not really competitive advantage. I mean, there are certain aspects which, of course, there would be the outsourcing more to Asia. But considering the shorter product life cycle, changes in technology, I think companies are realizing that there is an inherent risk which is in the longer supply chain, and I think that is going to drive certain aspects, certain segments of manufacturing which would make sense economically, not sentimentally, as you said. Economically, it would make sense to make manufacturing and have that closer to the demand markets.
And it's interesting you talk about demand, but it's also the innovation side of it, being close to innovation. We've seen a lot of automotive companies, for example, setting up R&D centers in Silicon Valley to be close to that innovation. So there's different parts of it. Everett, from your point of view, where do you see that supply chain shifting at the moment?
Well, I mean, I think I definitely agree. I think Charlie likes to put it, the greatest risk to supply chains is time zones, and I think that's a good way of looking at that. And I think that our math is getting better, and it's kind of leading to more recognition of that, because the math, the EMS part of the industry needs to more shift to is return on asset based math, and if you do that, we are almost magically competitive with China. I compete now head-to-head with China in the Bay Area, arguably the most expensive labor market in the world. I price head-to-head with China. But that's because if you're doing highly automated products, the direct labor component is actually quite small. And when you're looking at a return on asset model, uptime is everything. And the greatest risk to uptime is material. And so the math flows backwards, right? If you're gonna be a highly productive operation, you have to have rock solid supply chain. You cannot have those machines go down. So the math becomes different. So you can't risk uptime for 5% in your material costs.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think there's a common myth that the most important part of this is the labor content. The truth of the matter is the most important part of this is the bill of materials, and the bill of materials is actually quite often cheaper in that lower cost environment, regardless of of the labour pool. So there's an impact there. You mentioned automation and the fact that, as manufacturing does come back, perhaps it doesn't bring the same number of jobs. That automation is going to be inevitable everywhere, I guess. Do you think automation is a way that the playing field to a certain extent does become more level?
I think it's an imperative. It's certainly an imperative in high-cost labor areas such as the Bay Area where I live. But in terms of, when you go to China these days, it's also, there's far more automation. So it is becoming somewhat ubiquitous. So then it becomes about management, yes? If you have similar tools and similar skill sets, then it becomes who can run the most effective factory.
That's right.
And also, I know we'll get to this later probably, but when we talk about proximity to end market, that's a huge factor. If one is manufacturing larger, heavier products in the United States for North American customers, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But if one's making product for the Asian market or the Eastern European market, then when we add the logistics to the labor and the BOM, then that's another factor.
Yeah, and Everett, you mentioned math. From your point of view, Akhil, are people getting better at doing the math to understand the cost of ownership, the cost of landed goods?
No, absolutely. I think that has definitely been the progress that we have seen. I mean, at least in my experience, a decade ago, just even a decade ago or a few years ago, was how do we really look at this, right, objectively? And I always say that it's not around offshoring or nearshoring or onshoring. It's about right-shoring. And the right-shoring, that decision has to be driven by data. So the data elements, the concept and the understanding of total landed cost, total cost ownership is a lot more solid now that we have seen. The challenges now are that we are in a world where we cannot take a lot of time to come to a decision. So where we would take, look at analysis where it will take few weeks, we need answers in few minutes. So that's going to be the challenge and something that I think the companies have to look at. Because the world is just changing. I mean, few weeks is a long, long time to make a decision.
If we look at factory floor automation, and smart factory, which there's a huge amount of discussion here, it's all about real-time data. And if it's not real-time, it's predictive, so it's before. It brings me to another point about, any level of competitiveness is really defined to a certain extent in the quote. Do you think there's a challenge in the way people quote prices from different regions and how they're perhaps read by the purchasers and the way data is used in that quotation process, if you like? Do the customers understand the difference between the cost that you're providing and the factory door costs in Asia, for example?
I think broadly, no, not too many, and and it's sort of a recognition issue, right? The people in operations and procurement their metric is material cost. And there's not a column for landed cost. There's not a column for currency risk. Political risk, any of that. Right?
And that's true in the way they're rewarded, bonus, whatever else. That's part of the
when you talk to the people actually making these decisions, right? They're like, that's a problem. It's not my problem necessarily. And so I think it's probably the biggest problem there.
And that's a process that needs to be accelerated as well, Akhil. The way that those quotes are put together. Everybody I speak to in the OEM or EMS industry is constantly complaining about the amount of time it takes to put a bid together. So that's something that I think we're hearing more and more about. Pam, from your point of view, from what you've seen, we've talked for years and years about sustainability, about the importance of that, and this right-shoring, and so, to a certain extent, regionalization, I think, is really valuable from that side. Are we seeing shortening supply chains? Are we seeing landed goods, with the exception of some very high-profile consumer goods, spending less time traveling around the world?
We are. Ever since the large contract manufacturers of the world have really located on every continent, virtually, we have seen the ability to manufacture in region. I think the one component we haven't yet discussed, in addition to the math, is the customer, the business sense, right? So the customer, right now, the corporate customer occasionally will care that a product is made in region, because maybe they have stakeholders who care about that. The consumer customer, of course, in other industries, have shown to really care that products are local. You think locally grown, locally sourced. So whereas this is not a massive impetus at this point, I think it's coming. Why wouldn't it? It's happened in
Yeah.
every other industry.
For me, it would be great with all products to be able to see how far they've travelled in the same way you get all the calorie information, that labelling of how long that supply chain's been, because there is such a large environmental impact, but also there's a financial impact of that. And my sense, you talk about the large companies, it makes sense for them to be able to do that, but it's very difficult for those large factories or those large businesses not to be driven by white space. If they've got a factory somewhere in the world that needs filling, the desire to fill that factory can be overwhelming over that pragmatic response. Last question to everybody, and we'll start with Everett. How do you see it panning out this year? There's obviously political change going on. Interesting times to be in the US, interesting time to be in the Americas generally. What do you see happening in terms of manufacturing footprint?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're at some strange nexus right now, and not much is known how it's going to unfold. I think one thing I just became aware of the last couple of days, you've heard the talk of a border adjustment tax, and I don't know if there's any single thing that could more directly and immediately impact this issue than a border adjustment tax. It's a riveting issue, right? And I've always considered it to be another thing Trump has sort of thrown out into the conversation. In Washington, D.C., this is a very, very real subject. And it would seem to be driven by, on the Republican side, they are looking to balance tax cuts, essentially tax cuts in other areas like the corporate rate, with the border adjustment tax, and they're including it in their budget write-ups, right? So it's a very real issue. It's not just a straw man, and it will create energy. And the more people start to realize that that's actually a thing, there's going to be more energy around that. And I do think that there's the concept. There's probably a better word for it that Pam will know, but the idea of nudge in politics, where you don't always need to make a law. If you create an environment, people will tend to lean into that direction, and that will have repercussions. And you're seeing the C-suite at very big companies lean into the trend, and that's likely to trickle, and you'll see additional impact. And to one of Pam's points too, I hope another thing that trickles to the B2C side, to the consumer side, is the idea of the structural differences in our foreign competitors, and certainly China in particular, and awareness that it is not an open market presently. We can't invest there; they can invest here. We have environmental laws; they don't. They have labor protection laws. I mean, we have labor protection laws that they don't, right? They have access to government support in both the currency and direct financing that we don't. It's not a quote unquote level playing field. And I think the idea of creating equity in those trading relationships, and the truth is, it will negatively impact the consumer. And the consumer is going to need to realize that if they don't want to pay that extra $5 for their television set, they're talking about ruining the environment and people in another country.
Yeah, that has to be considered. And to your earlier point, I would say never underestimate a throwaway comment, or what appears to be a throwaway comment from the current management.
Yes.
It's important. Akhil, from your point of view, how do you see the trend shifting this year?
Yeah, you just mentioned an interesting one there. I think I've heard that companies are setting up Twitter task force to monitor the Twitter feeds coming in from White House, because that's impacting their share prices. So I think how it's going to play out is that definitely I'm seeing, and there have been requests where, okay, can we be proactive in terms of what may happen, right? And can we be proactive in terms of what our supply chains, what the impact would be? And things are going to change rapidly, frequently, that we know. So I think companies are going to take lot more proactive approach in terms of what changes have to be made in the supply chains, bolster it, make sure that there are no disruptions, considering serving the customer and the markets. So that's going to be one. The second point is going to be around. I just want to bring up the automation part of it. I think there's going to be a lot more focus on that element of that supply chain, because even if politically or through regulations or through laws, if the companies are driven to look at manufacturing, I think there's going to be a lot more focus on automation rather than, because we also have to be mindful that we don't have that kind of a workforce to get that huge factory set up. So there would be a lot of automation. There would be jobs, of course, no doubt, but it's more on the automation and the higher, going up the curve, the value curve in manufacturing. I think that's going to be the key.
Yeah, that's interesting. Coming to you last, Pam. I'm kind of this crazy utopian liberal that believes in free movement of people and free movement of goods and labour in this ideal world where everybody plays fair. And I know we don't live in that world, but that would be wonderful. How do you see us becoming less open in terms of markets, more protectionist? Where do you see it going?
The current administration seems to be going to a very strong economic nationalism. I think what's different, though, about our conversation is that we're in the electronics industry. And since the very beginning, electronics has been global. I mean, the invention of the television was, British and United States. And where were we buying our digital watches in the 1970s? From Japan. So it's not new, like in other industries where you can make an impact. Maybe the going offshore has less of a solid base, but for us, with the automation in our industry, coming back to math, I think we should sharpen the pencil on how many jobs would this actually bring back, given the increasing amount of automation where now you have one person for the screen printer and the pick and place, and maybe one other person for the oven and the inspection instead of a whole line of people. And then plus the whole employment need for transporting goods, be good or bad. I'm just saying objectively, how many jobs there would be affected if there was less importing. Yeah,
it's really important. It really plays to what Akhil said earlier. You really just want stuff to be made in the right place. Right shoring is the answer. Where is it practical for innovation, and where is it practical for the consumer? And where is it basically good for business? Thank you very much for taking part. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.